There's another thing on the water adjustment side and the acid side that I have a question about.
Okay.
Through most of my brewing career, I have used phosphoric acid to make adjustments on the hot side.
Mm-hmm.
All right. But increasingly, one of the cool things about doing this is I'm in contact with more and more pros, and we're talking about more and more stuff. I'm increasingly meeting people that are using lactic acid and very much prefer lactic acid. And I also know they happen to make great beers as well. Can you talk about the difference between lactic acid, phosphoric acid a little bit, and how that impacts the brewing process and final beer?
Yeah. Yeah. So phosphoric acid is really straightforward in terms of flavor. There's really no flavor impact from phosphoric acid because its main component, phosphates, those are already in the malt. They're already component of the wort. So you're not adding a flavor that wasn't otherwise there. Lactic, on the other hand, has some flavor to it. And depending on how that lactic acid was produced, in some cases, it's a kind of you do get a little bit of a buttery smell from it.
Okay.
Or you can get other characters. If you have a chance to smell a bottle of, like 85%
Yeah.
lactic, yeah, there's definitely an odor to it beyond the lactic sourness.
100%. 100%. Yeah.
So, depending on the beer style you're working with, if if it can handle that kind of background aroma or flavor, great. And I tend to prefer lactic because I think it's kind of a natural flavor when it comes to beer.
Sure.
I think it adds some complexity, but sometimes you don't want that. Depending on how much acid adjustment you have to do, you don't want that complexity in your beer. And that's why phosphoric is a good choice. The problem with phosphoric is that you can end up precipitating out your calcium as calcium phosphate. And so that's where Appendix B of the water book dives into that. And that's what those graphs are trying to show is, there's, if you just acidify a little bit with phosphoric acid, you're just adding a ton of phosphate to the mash or the wort or whatever. And any calcium salt additions you just added can precipitate out as calcium phosphate. Whereas if you acidify more, now the acidity of the acid starts to dominate and the solubility of calcium phosphate goes up. And so generally, if you are going to be acidifying your mash, your brewing liquor or your sparge water with phosphoric acid, acidifying to a pH of in the mid fives, at least, if not 5.2, is better, because by doing so, you raise the solubility of calcium phosphate and keep your calcium that you've added in solution.
I remember years ago brewing in Michigan and now in Southern Ohio. I first of all, and it's also a testament to how accessible you are. Years ago, when I was brewing at Rockford Brewing, I hit you up with a water profile, and I believe it was like on like Facebook Messenger. You messaged me back like right away, and you're like, that water should just make instant scale. And I'm like, but it does. You could get that place by the end of the week, you could have everything shining, and by the end of the week, everything looked like a glazed donut. But yeah, so thinking about situations like that where I had really high alkalinity water, and even when I was at Cartridge most recently, it was a 15 barrel system. And so I would be running maybe 350 gallons into the mash. And I would have, anywhere from 1.25 to 1.75 quarts per pound, very, very standard stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean, there would be times based on grist that I would have to add 500-600 milliliters of phosphoric acid in order to drop the pH of that.
Yeah.
Now, so at that volume, my concern was on the lactic side, because I don't have a lot of experience between the two, or at least I didn't at the time. And I don't have the chemistry background or the chemistry under the scientific understanding. I always heard, well, at a certain volume of lactic, you're going to start getting, flavors in your finished beer. It was a concern of mine, since I'm adding, up to 600 mils, sometimes more, into just the mash. That's not even taking what I need to be doing, adjusting my sparge. Is there any kind of rule of thumb? So just off the top, not looking at a water report.
Yeah.
Do you think I would have gotten into trouble with a situation like that if I was using all lactic acid?
Generally, I think 250 ppm as calcium carbonate of alkalinity. Your total alkalinity on your water report, 250 and above, that's when you start bumping into, if you use lactic only, you're going to start bumping into some lactate flavor. And the threshold for lactic flavor is like 300 ppm, 350 ppm, but that's that anion, not as calcium carbonate. So, people with waters where they're having, 275, 300 ppm total alkalinity,
360.
350. That's where I think you're gonna, if you just did lactic only, you would start tasting it.
Interesting.
And so when they do get that high, that's when I recommend like a 50-50 lactic blend.
Yeah.
And that way you cut down on both.
Yep. And of course, everybody listening at home knows, you all know that we're talking about food grade products here when we're talking about these acids, of course. But yeah. So Andrew in the chat says, I got to get that water book. He is correct. You do got to get that water book.